Arshdeep says, I understand that the false sense of authorship claims thoughts, feelings, actions, and outcomes, and probably assigns the same things to others too. Can we also say that it is claiming even more ordinary or mundane experience, such as hearing our voice as the self, or seeing a reflection in the mirror as a self, as belonging to a self, whereas those experiences are just going on as such? Well, this points to a subtle question of the difference between authorship and identity. And it is a subtle distinction that I make in this teaching that may not be so apparent in other things that you have read. So for me, this self that one sees in the mirror, that one considers oneself to be, is what I would call the functional identity. That me, or self, as Wayne, is a functional necessity to distinguish Wayne from Marlene. These two distinctions are crucial for functioning as human beings. And what I'm concerned with is not the philosophy of things, but I'm concerned with the suffering that we as people experience. So I tried for a long time not to be a person, to get rid of my identity, to be without a self, because I read a bunch of stuff and it seemed like that's what they were saying. And so I made efforts. To have no self. And I found it quite difficult. And then I encountered this teaching, and in the way it was expressed by my guru, Ramesh Balsekar. And he was pointing in a slightly different direction. And it's so slight as to be almost imperceptible. And yet it was, for me, huge. And that was to leave the whole self business aside for a moment and to look more towards this question of what he called doership and I call authorship. The sense of me, which is clearly there, being the author of things. Because this is really what, if you look into it, you may find is where the suffering that you experience arises from. The mere fact that you identify yourself as yourself does not cause suffering. Now, mind you, what it does is it enables the false sense of authorship to claim something. And so, without it, of course, then the false sense of authorship has nothing to claim, and all is well. But that state of no selfness is, in human beings, very rare and always temporary. It comes and goes. And you say, well, there's been lots of, accounts of people saying that for them there is no self. But those which are truly legitimate, I would suggest, are actually saying that there is no sense of an authoring self. That's really what's being talked about. And as Ramesh was fond of saying, when you called Ramana Maharshi's name, he turned around. There was a sense of, this is Ramana Maharshi. This body-mind mechanism is Ramana Maharshi. And that's necessary for functioning. So, that is what I call the me or the self. That which looks in the mirror, knows its name, knows its history, knows it has a personality and qualities and characteristics. But when that me feels that it is a separate, independent entity, capable of authoring things on its own, that's where the whole game changes. That's where the suffering comes from. And it is that quality which is what is absent in the sage. Arshdeep says, so when Ramesh says, quote, the seeking ends with the dissolution of the seeker, it merely suggests the end of the authoring self. But that the body-mind mechanism that knows what he is, rather than the body-mind mechanism that knows he is part of a larger functioning. That is correct. That is exactly correct.